The night Cole Merritt walked into Harlow's Books, he wasn't looking for anything. That's what made what happened next so impossible to explain. It was past 10 on a Thursday. November cold had locked down the city of Ashford like a fist, and the little independent bookstore on Calloway Street, the kind with mismatched lamps and a cat sleeping behind the register, should have been closed an hour ago. But the lights were still on, and Cole Merritt, the man the entire eastern seaboard underworld called the Warden, didn't walk past lit windows, not without knowing what was inside. He had been 3 blocks away when his phone buzzed. A problem with a shipment. A man who owed him $200,000 had decided, very foolishly, that he didn't. Cole had been moving toward the waterfront to handle it personally when the rain started, and something, he would never be able to name what, made him stop in front of that bookstore instead. Before we go any further, if you're new here, welcome to Mia's Romance Library. Hit that subscribe button and settle in, because this one is going to stay with you. I promise now. Back to Cole Merritt standing in the rain outside a bookstore he had no business entering. The bell above the door announced him. The cat did not react, and the young woman behind the counter didn't look up from the book she was reading, a battered copy of Rebecca, the cover so worn it was nearly white. "We're closing in 5 minutes," she said. Cole Merritt had not been spoken to that casually in 11 years. He stepped inside. Water dripped from his coat onto the old hardwood floor. The store smelled like paper and cedar and something faintly sweet, candle wax maybe, or tea going cold in a mug. Every shelf was labeled in handwriting so small it had to be hers. "I'm not buying anything," he said. She looked up then. Her name was June Whitfield, 23 years old. She had been running Harlow's Books alone since her father's stroke 6 months ago, working the register from noon until close and doing the inventory after midnight. She had dark circles under her eyes that she didn't bother hiding, flour on the sleeve of her sweater from the muffins she baked every morning to sell at the counter, and a look on her face right now that said she had dealt with worse things than a wet stranger in an expensive coat. "Then you're welcome to stand there until we close," she said, and looked back down at her book. Cole almost left. He should have left. Instead, he walked to the back of the store, where a small section was labeled Local History, and stood there in the dim light pretending to read the spines until he understood why he had come inside. He needed 2 minutes of quiet. That was all. 2 minutes where nobody needed something from him, where no one was afraid of him or performing loyalty at him. The bookstore was the only room he'd been in all week where the air didn't taste like pressure. He took a book off the shelf without looking at the title. He was still holding it, still standing there in his wet coat, reading about the 1947 flood that had swallowed the lower quarter of Ashford, when June Whitfield appeared at his elbow and said, "The cat knocked your wallet off the counter." Cole turned. The cat, a large, indifferent orange tabby, was sitting on the floor beside a leather wallet that Cole had not noticed fall from his coat pocket. June was holding it out to him, not looking at it, looking at him, waiting for him to take it back so she could finish closing. He took it. He glanced down at it, and something fell out. Not money, not a card, a photograph. Small, square, old, the kind printed on thick paper that no one has used since before digital cameras. It had been tucked inside the billfold so long the crease had become permanent. June bent and picked it up from the floor. She handed it to him, and then she went completely still. She was looking at the photograph. He was looking at her looking at it. The photo showed 2 children, a boy maybe 10 years old, with dark hair and a jaw already set in that particular stubborn angle that Cole still saw in the mirror every morning, and beside him a girl, younger, 6 or 7, with a gap in her front teeth and her hand curled inside the boy's, like she was afraid if she let go she would float away. June Whitfield had a gap in her front teeth. It had closed as she grew up, the way those things sometimes do, but the shape of her mouth was the same. The angle of her ears, the way she held very still when something surprised her, like an animal deciding whether to bolt. Cole Merritt had not thought about St. Agnes Children's Home in 22 years. He had paid a great deal of money to a great many people to make sure he never had to. "Where did you get this?" June asked. Her voice had changed. It was very quiet. "It was my father's," Cole said, which was all he knew. He had found it in a lockbox after his father died, or after the man who raised him died, the man who had come to St. Agnes on a cold January morning and chosen Cole out of 14 boys and never explained why. Cole had assumed the photo was from before, from some part of his father's life that had nothing to do with him. He had assumed the little girl was nobody. June Whitfield was looking at the photo like she recognized it. "That's my mother," she said. The rain was still hitting the windows. The cat had climbed back onto the counter. Cole Merritt, who had not been surprised by anything in 11 years, stood in the back of a bookstore in Ashford, holding a photograph that should not exist, and tried to understand how a dead man's lockbox had connected him to a 23-year-old woman who baked muffins and stayed open past close and read Rebecca when she thought nobody was watching. He needed to sit down. There was a small armchair in the corner, the kind placed for customers who wanted to read before buying. He sat in it without asking permission. June sat on the footstool across from him and looked at the photo again, and he watched her piece it together, the boy's face, the set of his jaw, and watched the moment she realized. "That's you," she said. "Yes." She was quiet for a long moment. "My mother never talked about St. Agnes," she said finally. "She said she aged out of the system at 18, and that was all there was to say. She died when I was 14. I didn't even know she'd been there as a child." Cole looked at the photo, at the little girl's hand folded inside the boy's, at the expression on the boy's face, 8 years old, already trying to look like nothing could touch him, and failing, because the little girl's hand was holding him, and he was letting it. "She called you something," he said. It came out of him before he decided to say it, a memory he hadn't known he still had. "A name, not your real name." June looked up. "She called you Junebug," he said. And June Whitfield pressed her hand over her mouth and said nothing for a very long time. Now, here's where it gets complicated, because Cole Merritt did not have the luxury of sitting in armchairs having revelations about his childhood. He had a man at the waterfront who owed him $200,000. He had a lieutenant who had been sending strange messages for 3 days. He had a network of people who depended on his attention, staying exactly where it was supposed to be. And he had just discovered that the little girl from his only soft memory, the only person at St. Agnes who had ever just sat beside him without wanting something, was standing in front of him, grown up, flower on her sleeve, running her dead father's bookstore alone. He left that night and told himself he was done. He was not done. He came back the next evening. And the one after that. He told himself he was being careful. He needed to understand the next connection between his father and Margaret Whitfield, June's mother. He needed to know how that photograph had ended up in a lockbox his father never mentioned. These were practical concerns. These were things a man in his position was right to investigate. He sat in the armchair, and June brought him tea he hadn't asked for, and they talked about the books on the shelves, and she didn't ask him what he did for work, and he didn't volunteer it, and for approximately 90 minutes every evening, Cole Merritt was just a man in a bookstore. His lieutenant, a careful man named Declan who had been with him for 8 years, noticed the absence. "You're going somewhere," Declan said one morning. Every evening. "Alone. You won't say where. I'm handling something." "You're not handling anything. You're going somewhere." Declan paused. "The men are asking." "Tell the men what I pay them to tell the men," Cole said. "Nothing." He went to Harlow's Books that evening and found the door locked. Not closed, locked, with the lights off and the cat nowhere in the window, which was wrong, because June always left the lamp on near the register even after close. Cole stood on the sidewalk in the November dark and called the number he had put in his phone 3 days ago, even though he had told himself not to. No answer. He called again. He went around to the alley behind the building, the staff entrance, a narrow door with a broken lock that June had mentioned twice and not gotten around to fixing. The door was open. Inside, the back office was a mess. Not the organized chaos of a busy small business, the specific disorder of a search. Filing cabinet drawers pulled out, papers on the floor, the safe behind the desk, a small fireproof box, really, the kind bought at hardware stores, sitting open and empty. And on the desk, written on the back of an invoice in handwriting that was not June's, "We know about the will. Give us the deed or the girl doesn't come home." Cole Merritt read that note 3 times. Then he called Declan. "I need everything you have on a property deed in Ashford." he said. Anything connected to a woman named Margaret Whitfield, deceased. And I need it in the next hour. What's in Ashford? Just find it. What Declan found 53 minutes later changed everything. Margaret Whitfield had not aged out of St. Agnes at 18 with nothing. She had left with one thing. A promise from the home's director, a man who had been quietly embezzling from the children's charity fund for a decade and needed someone to not report him. The promise was a legal document, signed and notarized, giving Margaret Whitfield first right of purchase on the St. Agnes property if it was ever sold. St. Agnes Children's Home had closed in 2019. The building, 4 city blocks in what was now the most desirable development zone in Ashford, had been sitting in legal limbo for 4 years while 3 different development companies fought over it. One of those companies was a shell corporation. The shell corporation was owned, through 4 layers of holding companies, by a man named Preston Hale. Preston Hale was Cole Merritt's second in command, had been for 6 years, had been, it turned out, quietly building a property portfolio on the side, using money he had skimmed from the organization over 3 years, and Margaret Whitfield's dormant legal claim, which he had discovered 6 months ago, was the one obstacle between him and a $40 million development deal. Margaret Whitfield was dead, but her estate, including that legal claim, had passed to her daughter, to June. Preston Hale had not known Cole had any connection to June Whitfield. He had sent men to take her as simple leverage against an obstacle he needed removed. Cole Merritt sat with this information for approximately 4 minutes. Then he made 2 phone calls and walked out to his car. Declan was already outside. "You're going to need backup. I'm going to need 3 things," Cole said. "The location where Hale is keeping her, your absolute loyalty for the next 6 hours. And after that, your silence." "You have all 3, Declan said. "You've always had all 3. They found her in a warehouse on the east side of the port, the same waterfront Cole had been walking toward the night he stopped in front of Harlow's Books instead. June was not hurt. She was sitting in a metal chair with her hands zip-tied in front of her, and when Cole walked through the door, she looked at him with an expression that moved through surprise, relief, and something more complicated, the particular look of a person who has just learned something significant about someone they thought they knew. He cut the zip ties himself. "Are you hurt?" he asked. "No." She looked at his hands, at the men behind him, at the general atmosphere of organized violence filling the warehouse. "I have some questions. I know. I have a lot of questions. I know that too." He put his coat around her shoulders because it was cold and she was shaking, and she let him, and they walked out of the warehouse into the November dark. Preston Hale was handled. This is not a story about how, only that it was done, and that by morning the Shell Corporation had been dissolved, the development deal collapsed, and the legal claim that Margaret Whitfield had earned as a 17-year-old protecting her own future was intact, belonging now to June. What that claim was worth, June didn't fully understand until the lawyers explained it. 4 blocks, she said. 4 blocks, the lawyer confirmed. "In the development zone." "Yes." June sat back in her chair and looked at the ceiling and laughed. It was not a happy laugh, exactly. It was the laugh of a person who had spent 6 months working doubles and doing inventory at midnight and eating crackers for dinner to keep her father's bookstore alive, and who had just been told that her mother had left her something worth more than she could comprehend. "She never said," June said quietly. "She never said a word." Cole was sitting across the table from her. He had been with her through 4 hours of meetings, for reasons that had nothing to do with the legal claim and everything to do with the fact that he hadn't been able to make himself leave. "She was protecting it," he said. "She didn't want anyone to know until it was time. She died when I was 14. She never got to tell me she knew." He said it before he thought about it. "She knew it would find its way to you." June looked at him. He had told her, the night before, sitting in her apartment above the bookstore, while she drank tea, and he sat with his elbows on his knees, trying to figure out how to explain 22 years of his life. He had told her what he was, what he ran, what his name meant to the people who knew it. She had listened without interrupting. When he finished, she was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "At St. Agnes, you used to sit outside in the cold, because the dining hall was too loud. I remember. I used to bring you crackers from dinner, because you wouldn't come in. I remember that too. You never said thank you, she said. I thought about that a lot, actually. For a while, wondering why you never said thank you. She looked at him steadily. I think you didn't know how. He didn't say anything. I think, she said, that you still don't. But I think you're trying. Cole Merritt left the organization 8 months later. Not dramatically, not in a way that made the papers or left bodies. Carefully, the way you dismantle something that other people depend on, making sure it was handed to people who would hold it without destroying it. Declan took the Eastern operations. 2 other men Cole trusted handled the rest. He didn't expect the city to let him go cleanly. It didn't. There were 6 months of negotiations he won't talk about, a period of 3 weeks where he didn't sleep more than 2 hours a night, and one evening where it genuinely seemed possible that everything would end very badly. It didn't. June knew about all of it. He didn't hide any of it from her. She read Rebecca at the counter during the day, and at night, she sat in her apartment above the bookstore and listened to him talk through what had to happen next. And when he was done, she would say something simple and practical and exactly right. And somehow, that was the thing that got him through to the following morning. By the time the last negotiation closed, Harlow's Books had a new furnace. The old one had been dying since September, a restored awning. The previous one had been embarrassing, June's word, and a small addition to the east wall that tripled the children's section, which June had wanted since she took over. Cole did not move in above the bookstore. He was not that man yet. He got an apartment 2 blocks away, and he came every morning before open and stayed until close. And on Thursdays, when the store was shut, he sat across from June at her kitchen table and ate whatever she was cooking. She was a good cook, patient and precise in the way that serious bakers are, and they talked about everything except what he had been and where this was going. One Thursday in March, she looked up from the pot she was stirring and said, "You're still deciding." "Deciding what?" "Whether you get to have this." She looked at him calmly. "Whether someone like you gets to just be a person in a bookstore." He didn't answer. "My mother spent 30 years being afraid that someone would find out about that deed," June said. "She spent 30 years protecting something and never used it. Never told me." She set down the spoon. "I don't want to live like that. I don't want to hold something valuable and never reach for it because I'm afraid." Cole looked at her across the table. He thought about a little girl who had tucked her hand inside his at age 7 in the cold dining room of St. Agnes Children's Home, and who had brought crackers to a boy who sat outside in the cold because the noise was too much, and who had become a woman who baked muffins for a bookstore that never quite broke even and stayed open late because she couldn't stand to turn anyone away. "I'm reaching," he said. She smiled, and for a moment she looked exactly like the girl in the photograph. "So here's what I want to know. When a man who has spent his entire adult life choosing power over everything else finally finds the one thing that matters more, is that redemption? Is it enough? Or does the past always have a claim on the future? Tell me what you think in the comments. And if this story moved you the way I think it did, share it with someone who needs a reminder that it's never too late to come home. I'll see you in the next one.